The voice before history. "Come closer," Cleopatra said. Her voice did not rise. It did not echo. It simply arrived. Closer still. The night seemed to lean toward her, as if listening were a physical act. "They will tell you this city was conquered," she continued calmly. "They will speak of walls and weapons, of dates carved into books." A pause followed, long enough for breath to settle. "But cities do not fall the way people say they do." The wind moved gently across the hills. "Tonight," Cleopatra whispered, "you will hear how Constantinople chose to rest. Constantinople at night. Constantinople lay wrapped in moonlight. The great walls stretched across the land like a memory made of stone, their surfaces pale and cool beneath the stars. Guards walked their familiar paths, boots brushing dust from ancient stone. They had walked these routes for years. Below them, the city breathed quietly. Courtyards cooled after the day's warmth. Fountains murmured, speaking only to themselves. Curtains stirred behind open windows. The city had survived everything. Empires had risen and collapsed against its gates. Armies had tested its patience. Time itself had tried to wear it down. And yet, on this night, Constantinople felt tired, not weak, not afraid, simply ready to stop holding its breath. The Bosphorus reflected the sky in slow shifting patterns, its waters steady and untroubled. Somewhere beyond the walls something watched. Cleopatra beyond time. Outside the city the camp lay unnaturally still. No drunken laughter, no sharpening of blades, no restless movement before battle. Cleopatra stood apart from the fires, her silhouette steady against the dark. She did not pace, she did not fidget. Time behaved differently around her. Cleopatra had lived inside centuries, the way others lived inside moments. She had seen cities born, celebrated, abandoned, rediscovered. She turned her gaze toward Constantinople. "I remember you," she said quietly. A general approached, hesitant. "My queen," he began, "the walls have never—" "I know," Cleopatra replied gently. She folded her hands, listening, not to him but to the land. "Stone remembers weight," she said, "and this city has carried too much for too long." The wind passed softly over the camp. Cleopatra closed her eyes, and far away, within the city, someone sleeping turned peacefully onto their side. Nothing is moving quickly. Nothing needs to happen yet. The city is still awake. Cleopatra is watching, and you may simply listen. The silent camp. The camp beyond the walls rested in a way armies rarely did. Fires burned low, not fed, not neglected, simply allowed to exist until they chose to fade. Soldiers sat quietly, some with eyes closed, others gazing into the flames without thought. No one sharpened steel. No one tested armor. Cleopatra had not forbidden it. They simply did not feel the need. She moved slowly through the camp, her presence unnoticed yet deeply felt. As she passed, conversations softened, then ended. Breath slowed. Shoulders relaxed. A young soldier knelt by the fire and stared into the embers, suddenly overcome by a feeling he could not name. Not fear, not excitement, but something like trust. Cleopatra paused nearby. "You will not need your sword tonight," she said softly, though she did not look at him. The soldier nodded without asking why. Above them the sky stretched wide and patient. Stars scattered like memories across it. Cleopatra looked up briefly, then back toward the city. Soon, she murmured. The word carried no urgency, only certainty. The city feels watched. Within Constantinople, the night deepened. A guard along the wall paused mid-step, his lantern swaying slightly. He had the sudden sensation of being seen, not threatened, not judged, but noticed. He glanced out across the dark hills. Nothing moved. Still, his grip loosened on the lantern handle. His shoulders eased. Further inside the city, a woman asleep beside an open window dreamed of standing in warm sunlight. The air in her dream smelled faintly of water and earth. A monk woke briefly in his cell, heart calm, mind empty, then returned to sleep without prayer. Even the stones along the streets seemed to cool more deeply than usual, releasing the heat of centuries. Cleopatra's attention rested on the city like a hand laid gently on a shoulder. "You are not alone," she whispered, though the city could not hear words. It answered anyway, with quiet, the first whisper of sleep. As the hour passed, something unseen spread through Constantinople, not surrender, not despair, sleep. Not the sudden sleep of exhaustion, but the slow, willing descent into rest. Thoughts lengthened, worries softened at their edges. In the palace, the emperor stirred. He dreamed of walking barefoot across cool stone corridors that stretched endlessly forward, each step lighter than the last. Doors opened before he reached them. Somewhere ahead, a woman waited. Cleopatra sat just outside the city walls, her hands resting loosely in her lap. She breathed slowly, evenly, matching the rhythm of the sea. "Let go," she murmured. The city responded with a long, gentle exhale. Bells that should have rung did not. Dogs settled without barking. The wind passed through towers without whistling. Time itself seemed to slow, as if curious about what would happen next. And nothing happened. Not yet. The city is resting now. The camp is quiet. Cleopatra is awake. There is nothing you need to follow, nothing to anticipate. Just the steady unfolding of the night. The emperor's first dream. The emperor drifted deeper into sleep. The palace around him dissolved, its walls stretching and thinning until they became light itself. He found himself standing in a long corridor paved with pale stone, smooth and cool beneath bare feet. The corridor opened into a wide terrace overlooking water. The sea was calm, extending endlessly in every direction, its surface reflecting the sky without distortion. Cleopatra stood near the edge. She did not turn when he approached, yet she spoke as if she had been listening to his footsteps the entire time. "You have been awake for a very long time," she said gently. The emperor tried to respond, but his voice remained behind him, caught somewhere between thought and breath. Cleopatra turned at last. Her expression held neither command nor judgment, only recognition. "You guarded this place well," she continued, "but guarding is not the same as carrying." She gestured toward the water. Images formed upon its surface, walls rising, banners changing, centuries passing like ripples. "You are tired," Cleopatra said softly. The emperor felt the truth of it settle into his chest. Morning without alarm. Morning arrived slowly. Light crept along the edges of Constantinople's towers, touching them gently, as if careful not to wake the city too abruptly. The sky shifted from deep blue to silver, then to a soft, diluted gold. Guards on the walls straightened, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Something was missing. No distant drums, no shouts from the hills, no tension tightening the air. The sea lay smooth. Below the walls, the camp beyond showed no movement toward attack. Fires smoldered low, figures remained seated or still. A guard leaned forward, scanning the harbor. "The chain," he murmured. The massive iron chain across the Golden Horn no longer strained against its anchors. It rested on the water, lowered. The guard waited for the alarm to sound. It did not. The Golden Horn relaxes. The harbor accepted the change without resistance. Water moved around the chain calmly, folding over it, reflecting the morning sky. Small ripples formed and faded. Cleopatra's ships drifted forward, not in formation, not with urgency. Oars dipped slowly, evenly. Each stroke was deliberate, patient. Cleopatra stood at the bow of the lead vessel, hands resting lightly at her sides. She watched the water more than the walls. She raised her gaze briefly. Soldiers above watched her, uncertain what they were witnessing. She offered no signal of triumph, only a slight nod. The ships continued their quiet passage, entering the harbor as if returning home after a long journey. The city watched, and did not resist. Sleep transition. The morning unfolds gently. Nothing breaks the calm. The city is awake now, but without fear. Cleopatra remains steady, unhurried, and you may let the rhythm of the water carry your thoughts slowly, softly onward. Ships that drift instead of attack. The ships did not announce themselves. They did not cut sharply through the water or advance in rigid lines. They drifted, guided more by the tide than by command. The oars rose and fell slowly, each movement deliberate and quiet, as though the water itself were setting the pace. Cleopatra remained at the bow. She did not scan the walls. She did not search for weakness. Instead, she watched the surface of the harbor, the way light bent and softened as it touched the water. A ripple passed beneath the hull. Another followed. Each ship entered the Golden Horn as though remembering the way. On the walls above, men leaned forward, uncertain whether they were witnessing a beginning or an ending. No arrows flew, no horns sounded. The harbor received the ships in silence. Streets that awakened gently. Inside Constantinople, the city began to wake. Doors opened carefully, one at a time. A merchant stepped into the street and paused, sensing a change he could not explain. The air felt different, lighter. A woman leaned from a window, her hair catching the early light. She listened, not for danger, but for something else. Nothing called out. Nothing demanded attention. The fountains continued their steady murmuring. The stones beneath bare feet felt cool and familiar. People spoke quietly, then fell silent again, sharing glances that carried questions but no fear. Somewhere deep in the city, a bell rang once, then stopped. No one pulled the rope again. The city seemed to agree that it was not needed. Gates that opened themselves. At the main gate, the guards stood uncertain. The hinges had not moved in days. The heavy wood bore the marks of centuries, each groove worn smooth by time. One guard rested his hand against the gate. He felt no trembling beneath his palm, only stillness. Another joined him. No command was given. The gate opened slowly, the sound of stone and wood moving together, deep and gentle, like an old breath being released. Beyond it stood Cleopatra. She was alone. No soldiers flanked her, no banners rose behind her. She stepped forward, her sandals touching the stone lightly. The city did not recoil. It did not shout. It watched. Cleopatra paused just inside the gate and rested her hand against the wall. "You've held long enough," she whispered. The stone was cool beneath her palm. The gates are open. The streets are quiet. Nothing rushes forward. Cleopatra walks slowly now, and you may let your thoughts slow with her. Moving gently, without destination, Cleopatra steps inside. Cleopatra walked deeper into Constantinople. Her pace was unhurried, each step placed with care, as though she were listening to the ground beneath her feet. The stone streets felt cool, smoothed by centuries of passage. Buildings rose on either side, their walls catching the early light. Shadows lingered in doorways, gentle and unthreatening. People watched quietly. A shopkeeper rested his hands on the doorframe, unsure why his chest felt lighter than usual. A child peered from behind a column, eyes wide with curiosity rather than fear. Cleopatra did not meet their gaze for long. She acknowledged them with presence alone. She passed beneath an archway worn thin by time and paused briefly. "This place remembers," she murmured. The city listened. Stones that remember her. Cleopatra placed her palm against a wall. The stone was cool and steady, layered with the memory of hands that had touched it before. Builders, travelers, soldiers, pilgrims. She closed her eyes. Images passed quietly through her mind. The city rising, the city burning, the city rebuilding itself again and again. She felt no need to claim these memories. They already knew her. Cleopatra traced a shallow carving left by time and weather. "You have endured beautifully," she said softly. The fountain nearby answered with a slow, patient rhythm, the square without crowds. Cleopatra entered the great square. It was nearly empty. The openness felt intentional, as if the city itself had chosen to make room. Light spread evenly across the stone, unbroken by banners or ceremony. Cleopatra stood at the center and breathed. No announcement followed, no proclamation. She simply stood, allowing the moment to exist without instruction. Somewhere nearby, footsteps paused. Conversations softened and ended. The square held the silence easily, like a bowl holding water. Cleopatra tilted her head slightly, listening. "This is enough," she whispered. And nothing argued otherwise. The city has accepted her presence. The streets remain calm. The air feels steady. Cleopatra does not hurry. And you may notice your own thoughts growing quieter, slower, less defined. The emperor wakes changed. The emperor woke slowly. Light filtered through the palace curtains, pale and unassuming. It touched the floor first, then the walls, then finally his face. For a long moment, he did not move. The dream lingered, not as confusion but as calm. The weight he had carried for years no longer pressed so heavily against his chest. He sat up and looked at his hands. They were empty. Rising from the bed, he crossed the room and opened the window. The city stretched below him, familiar yet subtly altered. There was no smoke, no sound of alarm, only the gentle awakening of a city at peace. The emperor exhaled slowly, as though he had been holding his breath for years without realizing it. No declaration, no crown. Cleopatra did not seek the throne. She did not summon the people or claim symbols of power. Instead, she chose a small, quiet room overlooking a courtyard where water flowed softly from a fountain. She sat, hands resting lightly in her lap. Those who entered bowed, then waited. Cleopatra met each gaze calmly. "There is nothing to announce," she said softly. "There is nothing to celebrate." Her voice carried no command, only certainty. And so nothing was declared. No crown was placed upon her head. No banner was raised. The city continued breathing. The city learns a new quiet. As the day unfolded, Constantinople adjusted. Markets opened later than usual. Conversations remained hushed, not out of fear, but out of instinct. People moved carefully, as though walking through a sacred space. Cleopatra's presence did not dominate the city. It steadied it. Children played softly in courtyards. Elders sat longer in the sun. The walls stood without tension. The city was learning a new quiet, one that did not require vigilance. Cleopatra walked once more through the streets, unnoticed now, and smiled faintly. The city has found its rhythm. Nothing presses forward. Cleopatra remains present. The story continues without hurry. And you may let yourself drift further, carried by the slow movement of time. Cleopatra walks alone. As evening approached, Cleopatra walked alone. The streets had emptied again, not from caution but from comfort. Doors were closed gently. Lamps began to glow behind thin curtains, their light warm and steady. Cleopatra moved through narrow passages where the stones curved inward, shaped by centuries of hands brushing past. Her footsteps echoed once, then faded. She paused at a small crossroads. Here, many paths met, some leading toward the harbor, others toward the hills. Cleopatra stood quietly, listening to the way the city's sounds blended together. Water flowed somewhere nearby. Fabric stirred above her. A voice laughed softly, then hushed itself. "This is how peace sounds," she murmured. Then she continued on, unhurried, unobserved. "The Hagia Sophia breathes." The doors of the Hagia Sophia opened slowly. Cleopatra stepped inside. The space received her without resistance. Above her, the great dome held the day's fading light, gathering it gently before letting it drift away. She stood still at the center. The air felt cool and ancient, layered with breath, prayer, and silence. Every sound softened here, stretched and dissolved. Cleopatra closed her eyes. She did not speak. She listened. The building breathed, slowly, deeply, as if relieved to rest between centuries of expectation. Cleopatra opened her eyes and inclined her head slightly, a gesture of respect. "Rest," she whispered. The echo carried the word upward, then let it go. Night falls softly. Night returned to Constantinople. This time it did not feel heavy. Darkness settled gently over rooftops and towers, filling the spaces between them with quiet. Lamps were lit one by one, their reflections trembling faintly on polished stone. Cleopatra stepped back into the streets. The city felt different now, not conquered, not changed by force, but released. She walked until the sounds grew fewer, until only wind and water remained. Above her, stars emerged slowly, unhurried. Cleopatra looked up once, then lowered her gaze. "Sleep," she said softly, "to the city, to time, to the long memory of stone." The night is complete. The city is calm. Cleopatra remains awake. Nothing else is required. Your thoughts may slow now, following the gentle rhythm of breath and silence. Lamps, water, and wind. Night settled fully into the city. Lamps glowed along the streets, their lights small and steady, casting gentle halos against stone walls. The flames did not flicker wildly. They burned calmly, as though aware there was no need to hurry. Water moved quietly through channels and fountains, its sound slow and repetitive. Each drop followed the one before it, endlessly patient. Cleopatra walked beneath the lamps, her shadow stretching and shortening as she passed. She did not disturb the stillness. A curtain stirred in an upper window. A door closed softly somewhere behind her. The wind moved through the city like a careful guest, touching rooftops, slipping through alleys, then passing on. Cleopatra paused and listened. This, she knew, was the sound of a city at rest. The city, after the lamps. The lamps burned low now. Across Constantinople their light softened and thinned, turning streets into quiet rivers of shadow and gold. The night no longer felt deep, it felt wide. Cleopatra walked slowly beneath the lamps, her presence barely disturbing the air. Each flame trembled once as she passed, then steadied. The city no longer watched her, it trusted her. Somewhere, a door closed gently. Somewhere else, fabric brushed against stone as someone turned in sleep. The night held these sounds without echo. Cleopatra paused beneath an archway and listened. This was the hour when cities reveal their true selves, not in noise, not in ceremony, but in rest, water that never forgets. Cleopatra followed the sound of water. A narrow channel wound through the stone, its surface smooth and unbroken. It reflected the lamps above like distant stars. She knelt and touched the water with her fingertips. It was cool, patient. Water remembered everything, every ship, every tear, every reflection ever offered to it. "You have seen it all," Cleopatra whispered. The water moved around her fingers and continued on, unchanged. Cleopatra rose slowly, letting the rhythm of the flow settle into her breathing. Footsteps without witness. Cleopatra walked where no one followed. The streets widened, then narrowed again, curving gently as though guiding her without instruction. Her footsteps echoed once, then vanished. No one watched from windows now. The city slept deeply. Cleopatra's shadow stretched long across the stone, then dissolved into darkness. She had walked like this before, through cities before their names were written, through streets that no longer existed. Tonight felt familiar and unburdened. The quiet between streets. There was a place where two streets met and sound seemed to stop. Cleopatra stood there. No water reached this space. No lamps illuminated it fully. Even the wind slowed as it passed through. This was the quiet between things. Cleopatra closed her eyes. "This is where endings soften," she said quietly. The city did not answer. It did not need to. Nothing moves quickly now. The story has widened. Cleopatra walks on. The city rests. You do not need to follow every step. The night will carry the rest. A balcony over the Bosphorus. Cleopatra stepped onto a narrow balcony overlooking the Bosphorus. Below her, the water stretched wide and dark, moving in long, unbroken breaths. Moonlight rested on its surface, breaking into silver fragments that drifted and rejoined. She leaned lightly against the stone railing. The city rose behind her in quiet layers, rooftops, towers, domes, each softened by night. Nothing called for attention. Nothing demanded to be remembered. Cleopatra watched the water as if listening to an old companion. "You continue," she said softly. The Bosphorus answered with a slow, patient rhythm, indifferent to empires, faithful only to motion. She remained there for a long while, letting the sound of the water slow her thoughts even further. Ships that do not depart. In the harbor, ships rested. Their sails were furled. Their decks were empty. Ropes hung loose, swaying slightly with the movement of the water. No ship prepared to leave. No ship rushed to arrive. They floated as if suspended between intentions, content to remain exactly where they were. Cleopatra walked along the edge of the harbor, her footsteps quiet on the stone. She paused beside one vessel and rested her hand against its wooden hull. The wood felt cool and solid, marked by time and travel. "Rest," she whispered. The ship rocked gently, as if agreeing, stone cooling in moonlight. The stones of Constantinople cooled as the night deepened. Heat from the day slowly released itself, rising invisibly into the air. Walls that had stood through centuries now rested beneath moonlight, their surfaces pale and calm. Cleopatra traced her fingers along a low wall. The stone held no resistance. It had learned patience long before this night. She could feel the city settling, not collapsing, not surrendering, simply easing into itself. Above her, clouds drifted slowly across the sky, never fully covering the stars. Cleopatra lifted her gaze once, then lowered it again. The night was complete, windows filled with sleep. Across the city, windows glowed softly. Behind them, lives slowed. Someone turned in their bed. Someone sighed and settled deeper into sleep. Someone dreamed of walking without effort through familiar streets. Curtains moved gently as the breeze passed. Cleopatra walked beneath these windows without sound. She did not look inside. She did not need to. The city was no longer performing for history. It was sleeping, and Cleopatra allowed it to sleep. The water moves, the stones rest, the ships remain still. Cleopatra walks on unhurried. You may let the details blur now, letting the rhythm of the night carry you gently forward. Cleopatra does not dream. Cleopatra did not sleep. She never had, not in the way others did. Sleep belonged to those who needed escape from time. Cleopatra lived within it. She sat on a low stone bench beneath an olive tree whose leaves barely moved in the night air. The branches cast soft, uneven shadows across the ground. Around her, the city slept deeply now. Dreams moved through houses and halls, through courtyards and towers. They drifted slowly, untroubled, carrying fragments of memory and hope. Cleopatra watched without envy. She had learned long ago that someone must remain awake while the world rested. Her breathing matched the rhythm of the city, slow, even, unforced. This was her rest, the longest hour of night. The night reached its deepest point. This was the hour when time felt widest, when moments stretched and loosened their edges. The stars seemed fixed, unwilling to move. In Constantinople, nothing stirred, no bells rang, no footsteps echoed, even the animals were still. Cleopatra stood at the edge of a narrow street, where light no longer reached. The darkness here was not heavy, it was calm, like deep water. She closed her eyes briefly, not to sleep, only to listen. The city held itself perfectly, balanced between what had been and what would come, what the walls have seen. Cleopatra walked beside the ancient walls. Her fingers brushed the stone lightly as she passed, feeling the grooves left by centuries of weather and touch. The walls remembered. They remembered fires reflected in armor. They remembered prayers whispered against them. They remembered footsteps that never returned. Cleopatra paused and rested her palm flat against the stone. "You have endured," she said quietly. The wall answered only with its steady presence. Above her, the sky opened wide, stars scattered like distant thoughts. Cleopatra continued on, her steps slow and respectful. Names spoken by the wind. The wind moved gently along the walls, slipping through narrow openings and over high towers. As it passed, it carried names. Names once spoken loudly, now softened by time. Names of emperors, soldiers, builders and travelers. Names that no longer asked to be remembered. Cleopatra listened. She did not repeat them. She allowed them to pass, carried away by the night air. "This is how memory rests," she murmured. The wind continued on, unburdened. The night has deepened, time has widened. Cleopatra remains awake. The city rests completely. You do not need to follow every thought. Let them drift, like names carried gently by the wind. Cleopatra, the first city. Cleopatra remembered the first city she ever walked through. It had no name then, not in the way names are kept. Its walls were low, its streets uneven, its people busy with the simple work of surviving the day. She remembered the smell of dust and grain, the sound of footsteps at dusk, the way the sky looked wider before towers learned to rise. Standing now in Constantinople, she felt the echo of that first city settle gently inside her. All cities she knew were born the same way, from gathering, from shelter, from the quiet agreement to stay. Cleopatra rested her hand against a column and closed her eyes. "This one will last," she whispered. "Not forever, but long enough. When empires become dust, empires pass through Cleopatra's memory like slow-moving clouds. She had seen banners lifted high and later folded away. She had heard cheers fade into silence, watched monuments crumble gently under the weight of time. Nothing vanished suddenly. Everything softened first. Cleopatra walked along a high terrace overlooking the sleeping city. Below her, roofs overlapped like scales, each one sheltering quiet lives and ordinary dreams. "Dust is not an ending," she murmured. "It is a return." The night accepted the words without echo. A city listening to itself. Constantinople listened, not for danger, not for command. It listened to its own quiet. Water flowed through hidden channels. Wind moved gently along the walls. Sleep deepened behind closed doors. The city no longer needed an audience. It existed for itself now. Cleopatra walked once more through a narrow street and felt the stillness respond to her presence, not tightening, not shifting, simply remaining calm. "This is enough," she thought, and the night agreed. The story has slowed even further. The night stretches wide and calm. Cleopatra remains. The city rests within itself. You may let the images soften now, letting time drift without direction. Time moving like water. Time moved through Constantinople the way water moved through stone. Not forcing, not stopping. It found its way gently, filling spaces, rounding edges, smoothing what had once been sharp. Cleopatra stood beside a narrow canal, where water slid quietly over worn stone. She watched the surface change with each passing moment, never the same, never hurried. "This is how it should be," she whispered. Moments did not stack here. They flowed. The city rested inside that flow, untroubled by direction or destination. Cleopatra breathed slowly, matching herself to the movement, until even the idea of time felt distant. Cleopatra watches stars fade. High above the city, the stars began to soften, not vanish, but loosen their hold on the sky. Cleopatra stood where rooftops fell away and the horizon opened wide. She tilted her head slightly, watching the faintest changes in light. Stars dimmed gradually, surrendering their brightness to the coming dawn. She had watched this countless times, in deserts, on ships, from towers that no longer stood. Each time felt the same, each time felt new. "Go gently," she said, though the stars needed no permission. The moment before dawn. There was a moment when night did not end, but paused. Not quite darkness, not yet morning. The city held this moment carefully. No one stirred. No sound rose to fill the space. Cleopatra stood very still. This was the space she knew best, the narrow edge between what had been and what would follow. Time itself seemed to wait. Breath slowed, thoughts thinned. Everything rested. Silence without expectation. Silence settled fully now, not empty, not tense, complete. Constantinople lay suspended within it, neither asleep nor awake, simply existing without demand. Cleopatra felt no need to move. Nothing was required of her here. The silence did not ask to be filled. It did not expect a future. It was whole. Cleopatra allowed herself to remain inside it for a long while. The night has reached its softest point. Nothing presses forward. Cleopatra stands quietly. The city rests within silence. You may drift freely now, without needing to follow thought or image. Light touches stone. Light arrived quietly. It did not pour in or announce itself. It touched the highest stones first. Barely a change in color, barely a suggestion of warmth. The towers caught it gently. Then the domes. Then the long curves of the walls. Cleopatra stood where shadow and light met, watching the city receive the morning without surprise. Stone responded slowly, releasing the cool of night one breath at a time. Nothing shifted abruptly. The city accepted the light the way it accepted everything now, without resistance. Birds over empty streets. A bird crossed the sky, then another. Their calls were soft and spaced apart, as if they too were careful not to disturb the stillness. Wings moved lightly through the air, then vanished beyond the rooftops. Below, the streets remained mostly empty. Footsteps had not yet returned. Doors stayed closed. The city lingered in the space between rest and motion. Cleopatra listened to the birds and felt the moment stretch. This is how morning should begin, she thought. Unclaimed, unhurried. A city that wakes slowly. Windows opened gradually. Not all at once. One, then another, then a third. Someone poured water. Someone stood quietly in a doorway, breathing in the morning air. Someone paused, sensing calm before continuing their day. The city did not shake itself awake. It unfolded. Cleopatra walked along a narrow street, her steps blending easily with the returning sounds of life. She did not stand apart. She passed through. No trumpets, no bells. There were no trumpets. No bells rang to announce a new order or a changed world. Towers stood silent, their voices at rest. The city required no signal. Life resumed in its own time, guided by habit rather than command. Cleopatra paused beneath an archway and listened. This quiet continuation pleased her more than any ceremony ever had. "Good," she murmured softly. The word drifted away, unnecessary to repeat. Morning has arrived gently. The city moves without effort. Cleopatra remains calm. Nothing calls for attention. You may remain in this drifting state, where time feels soft and unmeasured, people who feel lighter. As the morning progressed, people stepped into the streets carrying less than they had the day before. They did not speak of it. They did not question it. They simply moved with a subtle ease, as though something unnamed had loosened its grip. A man paused while tying a bundle and realized his hands were steady. A woman crossed a courtyard and noticed her breathing had slowed. An elder rested against a wall, feeling no urgency to move on. Nothing visible had changed, and yet the weight had shifted. Cleopatra watched from a distance, unseen, allowing the moment to remain untouched. Markets opening carefully. The markets opened slowly. Wooden shutters lifted one at a time. Cloth was laid carefully across tables. Baskets were set down without hurry. Voices remained low, not out of caution, but out of respect for the morning. Coins touched stone gently. Goods were arranged with patience. Glances were exchanged without suspicion. Cleopatra walked between the stalls, unnoticed among the ordinary movement of life. This, she knew, was the truest sign of peace, not abundance, but calm exchange. She passed through without leaving a trace, children crossing doorways. Children appeared in doorways. Some stepped out cautiously, adjusting to the light. Others lingered beside thresholds, unsure whether to move forward or remain where they were. A child looked up at the sky and paused, sensing something gentle in the air. Another crossed into the street and felt no fear. Cleopatra stood nearby, unseen, her presence like a passing shadow that did not darken the ground. She watched the children move freely, and felt the city settle deeper into itself. This matters, she thought, and then she moved on. Cleopatra among shadows. As the sun rose higher, shadows shortened. Cleopatra walked where shade still lingered, beneath arches, along narrow streets, beside tall walls that held the cool of night. She did not seek attention. She never had. Her reflection appeared briefly in a darkened window, then vanished as she passed. Cleopatra existed between moments now, neither guiding nor withdrawing. The city no longer required her presence, and so she remained lightly, enough to steady, never enough to weigh down. The day has found its rhythm. The city moves calmly. Cleopatra walks quietly among shadows. You may allow the images to soften further now, letting sound and motion blur into rest. The day finds its shape, By midday, Constantinople had found its shape, not a new one, not a forced one, simply the shape it always carried beneath expectation. Streets filled just enough. Conversations rose and fell naturally. The sun warmed stone and water without urgency. Cleopatra stood at the edge of a small square and watched the balance settle. Nothing leaned too far, nothing pulled too hard. The city moved like a steady breath. In, out. She turned away quietly, satisfied. Nothing is announced. No one announced the end of conquest. No proclamation echoed through the streets. No banners were raised to mark a turning point. And yet, everyone felt it. The absence of noise was the message. Cleopatra walked beneath a high archway where sound thinned and light softened. "Let it remain unnamed," she whispered. Some things, she knew, lasted longer when left untouched by words. Cleopatra walks beyond walls. Beyond the outer walls, the land opened gently. Fields stretched without hurry. Paths curved without destination. The city stood behind her, solid and untroubled. Cleopatra walked alone now. Her steps were slow, measured, unmarked. She did not look back immediately. Cities deserved their privacy once they learned to stand on their own. The wind brushed past her, carrying the familiar scent of earth and distance. Roads that lead nowhere. The road beneath Cleopatra's feet did not promise arrival. It bent slightly, then vanished into grass and dust, as if unsure whether it wished to exist at all. She followed it without expectation. Some roads existed only to be walked. Cleopatra moved forward at an unchanging pace, her presence blending into the open land. Behind her, Constantinople continued, without guidance, without witness. The city stands on its own. The road stretches gently forward. Cleopatra walks on, unhurried. You may drift further now, as the story loosens its hold on detail and direction. The sea keeps breathing. Far from the walls, the sea continued its steady rhythm. It did not change for cities or rulers. It did not pause for memory or loss. It breathed as it always had, long, even movements that smoothed the edges of the world. Cleopatra stood where land met water once more. She watched the surface rise and fall, until the motion no longer felt external. Her breathing matched it. "This will remain," she said quietly. The sea answered by continuing, unconcerned, complete. History settles like dust. Behind Cleopatra, history began to settle, not as a record, not as a story told loudly. It settled like dust after footsteps, slowly, invisibly, evenly. Names softened, dates lost their sharpness, events became impressions rather than claims. Constantinople did not resist this. It allowed history to rest lightly on its surfaces, never thick enough to obscure the present. Cleopatra felt the settling and did not interfere. This is how it lasts, she thought, by not being held too tightly. The city remains. From a distance now, Constantinople appeared unchanged. Walls still stood, water still flowed, people still moved through their days. And yet, something subtle endured beneath it all. A steadiness, a quiet confidence. The city no longer leaned on the past or strained toward the future. It remained. Cleopatra watched once more, then turned away, certain. Cities, like people, did not need constant watching once they learned to breathe on their own. Cleopatra steps out of time. Cleopatra walked until the world thinned. Land softened into horizon. Sound faded into space. Time loosened its shape. She did not disappear. She simply stepped aside. Moments passed without marking her presence. The air closed gently behind her, leaving no edge, no absence. Cleopatra was no longer part of the story, and the story continued without effort. The sea breathes, the city remains. Time moves gently onward. Cleopatra has stepped away. You may let go now, as the story prepares to rest completely. The world continues softly. The world did not pause when Cleopatra stepped away. Fields still warmed beneath the sun. Water continued its slow paths. People moved through their days with ordinary care. Nothing searched for meaning. Nothing waited for instruction. Constantinople rested within the larger rhythm of the world, no longer a place of tension or striving, simply a city among land and sea. Time flowed gently around it, smoothing edges, carrying moments forward without urgency. The story no longer needed a witness. It moved on quietly. Final descent, sleep without memory. Night returns again. The city lies beneath it, held by stone and water, protected by the calm it learned to keep. There is no ending here, only rest. No name needs to be spoken. No image needs to be held. The story loosens its final threads and allows them to drift away. The sea breathes. The land rests. Time continues. And you may sleep now, without memory, without effort, without thought. The night is calm. Everything is at rest.